Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered his armed forces to hold a 36-hour ceasefire in Ukraine this weekend to mark the Russian Orthodox Christmas holiday on Saturday. Mikhailo Podolyak, a top aide to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, appeared to dismiss the truce in a tweet. RF, Russian Federation, must leave the occupied territories, only then will it have a temporary truce. Keep hypocrisy to yourself. The German government said it released a wide-ranging aid package to Ukraine that includes, among other things, 30 drone detection systems, 20 rocket launchers, 63 pickups and 12 heavy-duty trucks, generators, and 36,400 wool blankets. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan spoke by phone Thursday with Zelensky and Putin. Erdogan's office said he repeated his offer to mediate peace talks. The French Defense Ministry said Thursday it will hold talks with Ukraine to arrange for the delivery of armored combat vehicles. The ministry says it will be the first time this type of Western-made wheeled tank destroyer will be provided to the Ukrainian military. The U.S. will provide $30 million in aid to Moldova to help the small country tackle an energy crisis and other economic hardships caused by the Kremlin's unprovoked and unjustified war against Ukraine, a U.S. government aid agency said Thursday. The Pentagon will send 50 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles to Ukraine, according to a U.S. official who was not authorized to comment publicly on the shipment. Another official, Air Force Brig General Pat Ryder, confirmed the shipment of armored Bradleys but would not disclose when they would arrive. The armored vehicles will be able to transport infantry troops into combat, Ryder said. An 80,000-pound vehicle that moves on tank-like track, the Bradley has a crew of 3 and can carry about 7 troops. The Bradley can be equipped with a 25mm cannon and other weaponry. The head of the Russian Orthodox Church, Patriarch Kirill, had proposed the truce in a statement Thursday. Kirill has been a strong supporter of the war, justifying the invasion as part of Russia's metaphysical struggle to prevent a liberal encroachment from the West. Christmas falls on December 25 in the current Gregorian calendar, introduced in the 16th century. The Orthodox Church still uses the Julian calendar, which celebrated Christmas on January 7. Russian military units that rely on recruits called up in recent months are hampering Russia's military force in Ukraine, a Washington-based military think tank says in its latest assessment of the war. The Institute for the Study of War notes that the head of the Russian-backed Donetsk People's Republic, Denis Pushilin, speaking after a recent Ukraine attack in Makiivka that killed 89 soldiers, said some of the officers in the targeted regiment were newly mobilized. Russian dictator Vladimir Putin's announcement on December 5 that Russian forces will conduct a 36-hour ceasefire along the entire front line in Ukraine is likely an information operation intended to damage Ukraine's reputation, the Institute for the Study of War said in its latest report. Putin ordered Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu to implement a temporary ceasefire along the entire front line in Ukraine from midday on January 6 to midnight on January 7, according to Russian state media agency RIA Novosti, citing an official Kremlin press release. Ceasefires also take time to organize and implement, and if Putin were serious about the January 6 to 7 ceasefire, it would not have been announced 24 hours in advance, according to the ISW. Earlier on January 5, Patriarch Kirill, leader of the Russian Orthodox Church and a fervent supporter of Russia's war in Ukraine, had called for a Christmas truce, inspired by the famous ceasefire on the Western Front on December 24, 1914. So that Orthodox Christian soldiers on both sides could visit church services on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. Both Ukrainian and Western officials, including U.S. President Joe Biden, immediately called out the hypocrisy of the ceasefire announcement, stressing that Russia had conducted attacks across Ukraine at military and civilian infrastructure on December 25 when many Ukrainians celebrate Christmas and New Year's, the ISW said. On New Year's Eve, Russia attacked Ukraine with missiles, followed by an attack with 45 drones minutes after New Year's, killing 1 and injuring 28 civilians around the country, including 3 children. A unilateral ceasefire in Ukraine declared by Russian President Vladimir Putin was due to come into force on Friday, but the hours leading up to the temporary truce saw renewed fighting, with Kyiv rejecting the move as a trick. Russia's defense ministry said its troops began observing the ceasefire from noon Moscow time, 9 o'clock GMT, along the entire line of contact in the conflict, but said Ukraine kept up shelling Russian-populated areas and military positions. Reuters could not immediately establish if there had been any lull in fighting after the deadline, which marked the eve of the Russian Orthodox Christmas in the region. In the hours prior, rockets slammed into a residential building in the Ukrainian city of Kramatorsk close to the eastern front line, damaging 14 homes but with no casualties, the mayor said. Residents described several explosions. Shortly after the ceasefire was supposed to come into effect, Russian-backed officials accused Ukraine of shelling the regional capital of Donetsk with artillery, Russia's state-run TASS news agency said. Putin ordered the 36-hour ceasefire in the 10-month-long war in a surprise move on Thursday, saying it would run through to the end of Russian Orthodox Christmas on Saturday. With weapons and financial support from the United States and Europe, Ukraine has driven Russia back from some of its territory, but battles are raging over eastern and southern cities. Bakhmut, 12 miles 20 kilometers southeast of Kramatorsk, has been the most intense battleground, still in Ukrainian hands despite dug-in trench warfare and months of battering by Russian forces that have left much of it in ruins. To reinforce Ukraine's defenses, Germany said it would deliver the country an advanced Patriot anti-aircraft missile system and around 40 Marder infantry fighting vehicles within 3 months. Washington is also due on Friday to announce a new $2.8 billion security package, including armored Bradley fighting vehicles. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky rejected Putin's ceasefire out of hand, saying the goal was to halt the progress of Ukraine's forces in Donetsk and the wider eastern Donbass region and bring in more of Moscow's forces. Ukraine's military general staff said its soldiers repelled repeated Russian attacks over the past day, with Moscow focused on trying to take towns in Donetsk, including Bakhmut. One witness in Donetsk heard outgoing artillery fired from the outskirts of the city, which is in control of Russia-backed forces, suggesting that they had broken Moscow's truce. The invading Russian forces have now also lost a total of over 20,000 units of equipment. Russia attacked Ukraine on February 24. January 6 marks the 317th day of the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. Invading Russian forces initially tried to advance from the north, east and south, attacking peaceful cities throughout Ukraine. Civilian targets across Ukrainian cities remain under sporadic Russian airstrikes, while settlements along the Russian border are regularly shelled. Since October, Russia has also been hitting Ukrainian cities with Iranian-made kamikaze drones. During this time, the Kremlin has changed the war goals in Ukraine several times. After the failed operation to seize Kyiv, Russian troops retreated from Kyiv, Chernihiv, and Sumy oblasts to concentrate on fighting for the parts of Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts that were under Ukrainian control before the full-scale invasion. Currently, Russian invasion forces have seized parts of Zaporizhia, Kherson, Luhansk, Donetsk, Mykolaiv, and Kharkiv oblasts. The Ukrainian armed forces have launched a counteroffensive in the south and east of Ukraine, striking at Russian ammunition depots and manpower clusters. Shortly after the beginning of the Kherson counteroffensive, the Ukrainian army launched another counteroffensive in Kharkiv Oblast in the northeast of the country. Most of the oblast was liberated from Russian occupation in just a few days. On November 11, the Ukrainian military also liberated Kherson and drove the occupying troops from the west bank of Kherson Oblast. The armed forces of Ukraine are also gradually liberating Luhansk Oblast. Russian President Vladimir Putin on Thursday ordered his armed forces to observe a unilateral 36-hour ceasefire in Ukraine this weekend for the Orthodox Christmas holiday, the first such sweeping truce move in the nearly 11-month-old war. Kyiv indicated it wouldn't follow suit. Putin did not appear to condition his ceasefire order on Ukraine's acceptance, and it wasn't clear whether hostilities would actually pause on the 1,100-kilometer, 684-mile, front line or elsewhere. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky dismissed the Russian move as playing for time to regroup its invasion forces and prepare additional attacks. At various points during the war that began February 24, Russian authorities have ordered limited, local truces to allow civilian evacuations or other humanitarian purposes. Thursday's order was the first time Putin has directed his troops to observe a ceasefire throughout Ukraine. Zelensky claimed that since he unveiled a peace plan in November, almost 110,000 Russian soldiers have been killed, and he accused the Kremlin of planning the fighting pause to continue the war with renewed vigor. The most comprehensive recent Western estimate of Russia's military losses was from a senior U.S. military official, who said in November that about 100,000 Russian soldiers had been killed or wounded. Russian authorities haven't provided any recent figure for their military casualties. Putin issued the truce order after Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan urged him in a phone call to implement a unilateral ceasefire, according to the Turkish president's office. The Kremlin said Putin reaffirmed Russia's openness to a serious dialogue with Ukrainian authorities. U.S. officials said they will send Ukraine nearly $3 billion in military aid in a new package that will for the first time include several dozen Bradley fighting vehicles. The aim is to get as much aid to Ukrainian forces as possible before spring begins and fighting increases. An announcement was expected Friday, said the officials, who spoke on condition of anonymity because the package's details had not been announced. In the latest fighting, Kyrylo Tymoshenko, deputy head of the Ukrainian presidential office, said Thursday that Russian shelling killed at least 5 civilians and wounded 8 in the previous 24 hours. An intense battle has left 60% of the eastern city of Bakhmut in ruins, Donetsk Governor Pavlo Kyrylenko said. Ukrainian defenders appear to be holding the Russians back. Taking the city in the Donbas region, an expansive industrial area bordering Russia, would not only give Putin a major battlefield gain after months of setbacks but rupture Ukraine's supply lines and allow Moscow's forces to press toward key Ukrainian strongholds in Donetsk. Kremlin troops have been ordered by President Vladimir Putin to hold fire for 36 hours from noon Moscow time. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and U.S. President Joe Biden dismissed the move, framed around Russian Orthodox Christmas, as a ploy designed to give Moscow's strained forces a chance to regroup, as well as a propaganda stunt. The U.S. and Germany will send armored vehicles to Ukraine, President Joe Biden and Chancellor Olaf Scholz said in a joint statement, providing a significant upgrade in firepower urgently sought by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Germany will also follow the U.S. in providing a Patriot missile defense system to Ukraine. Ahead of their planned ceasefire, Kremlin forces continued limited counterattacks to regain lost positions along the Svatov-Kreminna line. Russian forces claimed that Ukrainian troops continued counteroffensive operations in the area. Ukraine's military reportedly conducted a successful counterattack as Russian forces continued offensive operations around Bakhmut and west of Donetsk city. Germany announced late Thursday it will send Kyiv as many as 40 of its Marder infantry fighting vehicles, as well as a Patriot air defense system. In a joint statement, the U.S. said it will contribute Bradley fighting vehicles, providing a significant upgrade in firepower in the fight against Russia's invasion. Marie-Agnes Strack-Zimmermann, a member of Scholz's FDP coalition partner, called on the government to immediately add NATO-grade Leopard 2 battle tanks to the package. If Germany gave the green light, other allies would follow suit and send their Leopards, she said Friday in an interview with public broadcaster NDR. The document, a copy of which was seen by Bloomberg News, calls the effort part of revenue mobilization. It also orders 175 billion rubles, $2.4 billion, in extra spending to resettle 100,000 people from Kherson to Russia. The Ukrainian president joined allies in the West in ridiculing Putin's ceasefire announcement. A unilateral Russian ceasefire ordered by President Vladimir Putin was supposed to come into force along the entire front as of noon Moscow time, 10 a.m. Paris time, Russian state television said, but journalists reported shelling on both sides of the front line. The ceasefire, dismissed by Ukraine as an empty gesture and an attempt by Moscow to gain time to regroup its forces, was expected to last until late Saturday. Follow our blog for all the latest developments. All times are Paris time, GMT+1. Germany will supply Ukraine with around 40 Marder infantry fighting vehicles within weeks as part of a new phase of support coordinated with the U.S., a government spokesman said on Friday. U.S. President Joe Biden and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz announced on Thursday that both their countries will send powerfully armed infantry fighting vehicles to help Ukraine repel Russia's invasion. The United States will supply Bradleys, which usually come armed with 25mm autocannon, a 7.62mm machine gun and anti-tank missiles, while Germany will send Marders, they said. If confirmed, this would be the second city to be shelled after the start of Moscow's unilateral ceasefire. The U.S. will send Ukraine nearly $3 billion in military aid, in a massive new package that will for the first time include several dozen Bradley fighting vehicles, U.S. officials said Thursday, in the Biden administration's latest step to send increasingly lethal and powerful weapons to help Ukraine beat back Russian forces. European allies also stepped up their weapons commitments. Germany announced it will provide armored personnel carriers and a Patriot missile battery to Ukraine, and France said it will soon hold talks to arrange for the delivery of armored combat vehicles. The latest U.S. aid, totaling about $2.85 billion and about 50 Bradleys, is the largest in a series of packages of military equipment that the Pentagon has pulled from its stockpiles to send to Ukraine. It is aimed at getting as much to the Ukrainian forces as possible during the winter months, before spring sets in and an expected increase in fighting begins. President Joe Biden and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz confirmed in a joint statement Thursday that the U.S. would provide Bradleys to Ukraine while Germany would provide Marder armored personnel carriers. The statement did not give the number of vehicles or the total cost of the aid package. The U.S. last month announced it will send Ukraine its first Patriot battery, the most advanced surface-to-air missile system the West has provided for the war effort. The Bradley fighting vehicle is a medium-armored combat vehicle that can serve as a fortified troop carrier on the battlefield. It has tracks rather than wheels, but is lighter and more agile than a tank. It can carry a crew of 3 and an additional 5 or 6 troops, and is seen as a critical way to move forces safely into battle. Zelensky and other Ukrainian officials have pressed Western leaders to provide more advanced weapons, including armored vehicles and the Patriot missile batteries. A $1.85 billion aid package last month, in addition to including a Patriot battery for the first time, provided an undisclosed number of joint direct attack munitions kits to modify massive bombs by adding tail fins and precision navigation systems so they can be guided to a target. A unilateral ceasefire in Ukraine declared by Russian President Vladimir Putin officially came into force on Friday, but the hours leading up to the truce saw renewed fighting, with Kyiv rejecting the move as a trick. Russia's Channel 1 state television said the ceasefire began at noon Moscow time, 9 o'clock GMT, along the entire line of contact in the conflict. Putin ordered the 36-hour ceasefire in the 10-month-long war in a surprise move on Thursday, saying it would mark the Russian Orthodox Christian Christmas. Earlier on Friday morning, Christmas Eve for Russians and many Ukrainians, Russian shells hit Kramatorsk, a Ukrainian city near the front line in the industrial Donetsk region that Russia claims as its territory, the city mayor said. Shortly after the ceasefire was due to come into effect, Russian-backed officials accused Ukraine of shelling the city of Donetsk with artillery, Russia's state-run TASS news agency said. With financial support and weapons from the United States and Europe, Ukraine has driven Russia back from some of its territory, but battles are raging over eastern and southern cities. Ukraine's military general staff said its soldiers repelled many Russian attacks over the past day, with Moscow focused on trying to take towns in Donetsk, including Bakhmut. Patriarch Kirill, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church and a supporter of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, has urged all parties involved to cease fire and establish a Christmas truce on January 6 to 7. The Russian Orthodox Church and some other Orthodox churches celebrate Christmas on January 7, while a majority of Orthodox churches celebrate it on December 25. The Orthodox Church of Ukraine had historically preferred the January 7 date but allowed its parishes to celebrate on December 25 last year. In June, Patriarch Kirill said that Russian troops fighting against Ukraine were protecting Russia, guided by an inner moral feeling based on the Orthodox faith. On April 3, Kirill gave a speech at the main church of Russia's armed forces, praising young Russians who joined the army, which he called a real feat in wartime. During Russia's full-scale invasion, the Russian Orthodox Church has also illegally annexed 2 dioceses of its autonomous Ukrainian branch, the Crimean Diocese and the Rovenki Diocese in Luhansk Oblast, in parallel with Russia's illegal annexation of Ukrainian regions. Previously they were subordinated to the Moscow-affiliated Metropolitan of Kyiv, but now they are controlled directly by Patriarch Kirill. Russian oligarch Yevgeny Prigozhin, who founded the most powerful mercenary group in the country, on Thursday released the first group of prisoners whom he recruited to fight in the war against Ukraine for 6 months in exchange for freedom, according to NBC News. The Vladimir Putin ally admitted his role in founding the mercenary Wagner Group in 2022, the same year he was sanctioned by the US for interfering in its elections. Prigozhin urged the men not to practice that skill on forbidden territory and said they could return to battle if they wanted to kill the enemy again. The Wagner Group, which comprises top military officers, former spies and former prisoners, has the motto, Blood, Honor, Motherland, Courage. Originally staffed by Russian veterans, the group has fought in countries including Libya, Syria, Mali and the Central African Republic. The group, which has been accused of committing countless human rights abuses, has been used in the war against Ukraine to make up for Russian troop shortages. Prigozhin, whose Concord catering company earned him a fortune, has recruited 35,000 prisoners since last June, according to an estimate from prisoner advocacy organization Russia Behind Bars per the New York Times.